Hello and welcome to tonight's OddKey Cafe. I hope you're all enjoying the weekend. Tonight we have a very special guest. He's the creator of Danger Girl and Fairy Tale Fantasies. He's worked with Sideshow and Disney and currently works with DC and Marvel Comics. J. Scott Campbell, thank you so much for being here.
Gosh, my pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. Happy to be here.
I know the community is super excited to hear from you. I hope you don't mind. We like to keep it a little Q&A format so the community can get involved. Sweet. So
Of course.
if any of you guys are listening to the audience, if you have questions, type them in general chat or raise your hand to come up and ask them yourself. I guess I'll kick it off. We know you have the animated Spawn 300 cover digital collectible releasing soon. I know the community would love to hear some thoughts about that because it is your first digital collectible, is it not?
It is. I guess Marvel might have released one of my archived covers through, is it VV, how they pronounce it? But I mean, I can't say I was terribly involved with that. It was my artwork that Marvel, you know how Marvel is, they've got a catalog of artwork and sometimes you see it pop up on products and things like that. But I would say this is certainly the first one where I've had any sort of direct involvement, which is very exciting. I mean, Todd approached me personally and pitched me on what he had in mind. Spoke with Jake about it as well, and I've been very involved with the creation of this one, which is a totally different experience. So I really do appreciate that. So, which is a lot to do with why I'm here tonight. I certainly love being involved. When I get to be, my excitement level and participation level gets way more amped. So.
Awesome. That's unfortunate to hear that the first one you weren't really involved with, but I'm glad you're getting involved in this one, and hopefully it's a good first experience.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting. I've had my eye on this type of format for art for a while, so it's fun to finally get to jump in. I've been watching from the sidelines for a while.
Yeah, it's definitely a learning curve for sure. We got actually a question from the audience. Do you have any advice for artists trying to break into the industry? He's 17, published some work, but he's still trying to make it.
Well, 17, that's a great age. I mean, I was fortunate enough to break in when I was 19, which at the time was considered pretty young. I think that's a great age to be pursuing this. I mean, it's such a different landscape now. It's hard for me to sometimes give advice because the world has changed so much. Back when I was doing this, there was no such thing as social media. There was no way of getting your art out there other than putting it in an envelope and sending it to publishers and hoping they open the envelope and discover you, which is how it worked for me. There was a talent search in the comic book industry was growing at a rapid pace in the early 90s, and publishers, this case, Image Comics, was growing so fast. They were looking for talent like crazy. So I think I just happened to luck out at the right place at the right time. I think I had a lot easier go of it than a lot of my predecessors and maybe perhaps the ones that came after. But these days with social media and this sort of thing, I see people get discovered all the time just because their artwork gets traction. They put it out there and get some eyeballs on it. That's how I would go these days. I mean, that's the route I would go. I would make such a racket and a noise with my artwork online. I would demand to be discovered, but that's probably my obnoxious way of thinking how I'd go about it now. That's the best advice I can give,
Yeah, it's definitely a new day and age. Todd, welcome to stage.
Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
We can hear you.
I just come for a few minutes because this is Scott's day, but I want to make sure I come and give him the proper accolades that he deserves here. I hopefully everybody in here is a bit of a fan, but if not, let's go back and let me sort of tell you my experience with Scott, because I'm really impressed with him. And it's interesting. I've told Scott, I've talked to other people that bring him up and use him as an inspiration because they think he's like super smart, which I'll get to. So my first interaction with Scott was literally going back to the advent of Image comic books, right? So, Jim Lee, who was one of the founding partners of Image Comics, started a studio. I didn't, but Jim Lee had a studio, Mark Sylvester, and Jim Lee had to fill his studio with able bodies that could do the artwork. And I remember him grabbing a handful of these young sort of whippersnappers. I'm getting old, so I can use that word. These young, and so it's weird because I still think of Scott as like the kid, because when I first met him, he was like the kid, although I was like 30. So it's like, it wasn't like I was an old man. I was 30, but he was like a kid at that point. So how old would you have been in 92 then, Scott?
92. I mean, I know I got in when I was 19, so I must have been 19, I suppose. I mean, it was, yeah.
No, you were right. So you were young. You were like, to me, it was like, oh, I'm 30, you're the kid, right? So he was one of the image kids. Mark Silvestri had some, Rob Liefeld had some, and whatever. And so, but there was a bunch of kids. Can't say they were all equal. And then very quickly, I see a couple covers from whatever else. But then sort of the big moment is, you guys know, he does his Danger Girl, and it just wowed me. Like, to me, that was when Scott set himself literally a cut above all the other kids, right? So I would say there was another guy, Travis Terrest, that was doing some nice stuff, but Travis could never sit at his desk and do work, or he was super slow. I don't know what happened, but so Scott was doing his work, and it was for me, it was staggeringly good, especially for his age, right? So I sort of kept an eye on him from a distance with a bit of jealousy, hoping that someday he would quit Jim Lee's office and then beg me to do Spawn for 5 years, but that never happened. But I was waiting by my phone the whole time. But as the years went by, here's what Scott's done that very few people have been able to do. Scott has now made a reputation as, in general, as sort of like that cover guy, right? The cover artist guy. Now, there are now tons and tons of people and artists and creators who have taken that route, who basically make a living doing covers, right? Boom, you're in, you're out. I can say, though, unequivocally, I can count maybe on one hand, I don't even know if I can get there, the number of people that I think are impactful, influential, truly ongoing cover artists. At the top of that, I actually would put Scott, and not because he's on stage here. I just would put him up there. I know there are people like Alex Ross and Bill Sienkiewicz and those guys, and I like them. But I think in terms of doing pure, cool, dynamic, fun, superhero comic book covers, that Scott's the best at it. Scott's the best at it. He puts out what I would have wanted when I was a kid on a cover, and that's it. And I think that's his genius and his magic that he ends up doing. On top of that, he's figured out, and here's where the smart comes in. He's figured out how to do that and create almost a little cottage community and cottage industry around himself. And there are, again, only a couple I can think of on my finger that have figured out that puzzle. And it's not an easy puzzle. And so, interestingly, Scott, I tell you that when we get on the phone and talk, a lot of it is just us sort of throwing ideas and business stuff back and forth. We don't really sort of talk about what nib you're using or whatever. But so we're usually just sort of going, oh man, what worked for you? Hey, maybe I'll try that. Or hey, I'm doing this. What's going on? And it really sort of just is a continuation as to how we even got to talking about doing a digital collectible here, right? Just another thing I think we're both very curious about lots of things, and we just try things. But Scott's sense of wonder and curiosity has never wavered. His design of his covers, if you look at them, are again top shelf. And it just for me, it's been a pleasure watching you, Scott, for all these decades. Literally, we're now at decades.
It is decades,
and being able to just sort of have a chat with you, and every now and then actually being able to extract some of your talent onto some of my projects. So some of the covers you've done are some of the most sort of asked about and talked about in the 30-year history of the Spawn book. So I I applaud you for all of that. So he's going to come across as being sort of low key and humble and stuff, but he's actually a bit of a savant. So and pepper him with whatever hard questions you want, because he's got a lot of answers. So anyway, that's it. That's all I got. I'll jump off stage.
My goodness. Well, thank you, Todd. I'm at a loss for words. That's very, very kind of you to describe me in such glowing terms.
All right. These good people will pepper you with all the questions. They're not shy about asking you the hard and the easy questions. So enjoy your day.
Sounds good, man.
Appreciate you coming on board.
Hey, thanks for popping in, Todd. That was really cool. I appreciate that.
All right. Be good.
Well, that was awesome. You heard the man. Come up and ask your questions. Ask him the tough ones. Don't be shy. We actually do have a question from Colby Jack. He said, since Todd shared a story about you, he wants to know what's your favorite Todd moment?
Oh my gosh, there's almost too many to count, really. I mean, I've actually really, one thing I will say that it's been really cool. I think in the last, I'd say in the last 5 years, I probably had the most interactions with Todd. I think leading up to Spawn 300, which the digital collectibles based on my cover for Spawn 300, leading up to that project, I'd say maybe about a year or two, we were talking more and more regularly, and it's just been really cool to have that sort of interaction. I'm amazed and inspired by just all the different ways Todd has built up his, you start off with the comics, and then you have the toy division, and then like the licensing for toys, and now with OddKey. I'm somebody, what Todd was probably alluding to is I'm somebody who also is terribly fascinated with not just the art, but how do you market art? How do you sort of like get it in front of the audience? What he was talking about with the comic book covers. When I was doing the Spawn 300 interior pages, Todd said, I want you to tap into, as he put it at the time, he goes, tap into like, what does 12 and 14-year-old Scotty want to see on these pages? And I know what he means. Like, you always want to like tap into that youthful energy. I think sometimes we outgrow what's fun. And I think it's always important to always tap back into that youthful spirit. And I think that's probably what, if I know, based on our other conversations, I think that's what he sort of sees in my work. And I've always seen that in his. I always think there's that youthful energy and just excitement that's in the work that I think is just it's always what I'm trying to bring to my work. So I think I'm always fascinated with the how do you market this? Marketing is fun too. Marketing is its own art. It's fun to get people hyped. I love teasing when something's coming out. I love the idea of a trailer, the teasing the audience to get them salivating at what's going to come out. I think there's such an art to all of that. And so many artists, I think they miss all that nuance. And so much of what we do is creating excitement. The artwork is a part of it, but there's kind of a whole nuance to sort of like getting people really psyched and excited. So I think we share that mindset between the two of us. But as far as a specific story, I'd probably have to get a little more thought, but I do really, like I said, enjoy the camaraderie of talk and shop and sort of like picking each other's brains and seeing where each other's next move is going to be. I think we get great inspiration from each other that way. And it's definitely changed and allowed me to sort of pick my moves a little bit better, getting his insights into things.
That's awesome. Yeah. Marketing is definitely a whole art in itself. I agree.
Well, it's funny because I think that's the thing that's so funny about artists. And this is another thing. There was a 17-year-old who had the first question, like, oh, how do I sort of break in? Something I'll also say is a lot of people, once they break in, sometimes there's this funny thing you'll see with artists. And I find this even with a lot of my colleagues who've been around for a long time. And I think, again, Todd was sort of alluding to this too, is sometimes there's this apprehension to tooting your own horn, which is kind of what marketing is. It's like there's this. I think sometimes artists think they're not being humble if they somehow like hype themselves or hype their sort of product. But when you think about anything, when you think about musicians and you go to see a concert, you kind of want them to be bigger than life. You want that stage show to have big lights, and you want them to be loud, and you want it to sort of just feel like, yeah, that's big. That's cool. I'm part of this bigger thing. And I think as artists, we sort of like need to bring it. We need to sort of like bring the bells and whistles. I think sometimes artists feel they're a little shy about that. And I think if you don't believe it, why is your audience going to believe it? You almost have to like go out there with a little bit of like bravado, because that's what gets people thinking, yeah, this artwork is cool. Like that person believes it's cool who drew it, so I believe it's cool too. If you kind of go out there a little bit sheepish, kind of going, I don't know if this is that great, your audience will subconsciously think, yeah, maybe it's not that great. Like, so you don't kind of want to go out there with that. But sometimes that is an artist mindset. And I get it, because artists, we beat ourselves up. We always say that wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. Or you kind of like look at your artwork and think, oh, that could have been better, maybe the next time. But again, you kind of have to front load your enthusiasm a bit, even though as artists, we're always looking to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Everyone's their own worst critic, so it can definitely be hard to try to grow that. Frisky, go ahead and ask your question.
All right, thank you. Hey, thank you, sir, for attending the cafe tonight. I, for one, am a huge fan, and thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
I'm from the older generation, so I grew up with the Batman animated series after school. With the passing of the great Kevin Conroy, what's your favorite or fondest memory of his work?
I mean, that one definitely hit me hard, like a lot of us, I think, that fall into that. I mean, I think his swath of sort of the mythos of Batman runs deep and it runs long. I mean, you're talking multiple decades that we've all sort of had his. I mean, I just put a post up today that said, every time I draw Batman, it's his voice I hear in my head. I mean, and I've enjoyed a lot of the Batmans. I mean, there's the live actions, all these ones have been great, but there's no doubt that is the voice that I think so many of us think about when we think about Batman. It's like we don't even think about it. That's just the voice that's there, and that was quite the shock. And I would say my fondest memories were, of course, of the very original run of the Batman animated series. I mean, right after the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton movie came out. I mean, I think that hit the ground running with that tone and took it from there and kind of kept going with the ball, as they say. And I think that still is such a benchmark in like animation and storytelling. I mean, Bruce Timm became a legend. Paul Dini, I mean, the guys who worked on the show, and certainly Kevin and Mark Hamill's voice work on there, along with all the many other actors. I'm sure I'm forgetting their names, but yeah, I mean, he's left an indelible mark that I think you could see on the internet today. I mean, I think it's probably some of the most tributes I've seen of anybody who's kind of passed away in sort of the geek or nerd community in recent times. And unfortunately, we've lost a lot of talent in recent months and years. So that's saying a lot. But yeah, no, I adored that guy, and his voice is just, it's iconic. I mean, people throw that word around a lot, but there is no doubt he's an icon.
Thank you, sir. And one follow-up question: if you were to choose one comic book to read for the rest of your life, would you choose Gunslinger or Scorched?
I think I'm more of a gunslinger guy. I like that character a lot. In fact, Todd often points out that I pitched him a gunslinger cover that he really liked. It was a sketch. And then when I turned in my final cover, it was a totally different drawing. And he goes, what was that? What about that first one? And I was like, I told him, I said, I just had too many ideas, and I kind of like got bored with that idea by the time it came time to draw it. But I feel like that character is really speaks to me. I also like drawing that character. Really, it's funny with Spawn characters. I always find it's interesting to see how everybody interprets them. Right? It's everybody kind of has their own little voice, and with that character, like I really like drawing him kind of long and lanky and that sort of Clint Eastwood body type. I know sometimes it's Todd tends to be pushing me to go like, make him beefier, make him stronger. But I just think there's something cool about that, just the slinky gunslinger. I think there's something kind of that just really speaks to me. I love that look. So I got to go gunslinger on that one. But by a narrow margin, let's put it that way.
That's really funny. To provide some context, we have a trivia nights in this Discord where there's Gunslinger and Scorched. So you just there's a little rivalry going on.
I hear you. Well, I hope I didn't disturb the peace too much with that answer. But
Raul, please go ahead and ask your question.
Hello. Here's I am a big fan for your work. I love your work
Thank you.
in Spider-Man and Spawn. I participate in the um, in the contest of Black Cat, and you come
Okay.
in my draft.
Nice.
I want to ask you, how do you know if you are ready to submit your portfolio, or dare you take the next state in the comic industry?
I'm not sure if I fully understand you, Raul. You're talking about like when you submit like a portfolio to possibly get work in the industry. Is that what you mean?
Yes, sorry, I am from Colombia.
No, don't. I mean, believe me, your English is much better than my speaking Colombian. So you're ahead of me. No, as far as you know, you never really know when you're ready. I think you just have to like, and oftentimes people when they submit their portfolios or show them, oftentimes now at conventions, there's so many conventions now that travel the not just in the US but around the globe. Oftentimes they'll look at your portfolio right there. Sometimes publishers will set that up to give artists time to get a review right in front of them, which I never had the chance to do. I actually had back then there just weren't as many conventions, so sending it by mail was my best option. But sometimes even if you're not ready, you'll get good feedback. You'll get information that makes you go, "Oh, I didn't see it that way. I can improve based on that review," and you can try again. I mean, I think Todd McFarlane, he often talks about that he sent in his samples, I mean, a crazy amount of times. I guess he got rejected quite a bit, and he had such determination. I think he's an inspiration for all of us to not give up, because he, I mean, there were many times where I think he could have given up, but I think he just persevered, and obviously his success speaks for himself. So, if anything, I feel like I again got a little bit of an easy break because there was such a thirst for talent or hiring talent when I got in. But I do think that there's something to be learned about just putting your stuff out there, getting feedback, taking that feedback. I mean, it never stops. That's the funny thing. Just when you get hired, it doesn't mean you stop getting feedback, whether you like it or not. The internet will give you the feedback whether you ask for it or not. And so we're always kind of taking in information and deciding, oh, should I take that critique and do something with it, or should I blow it off? I think you're always, as an artist, like they say with the Rolling Stone, catches no moss. You got to kind of keep moving, otherwise you'll sort of get stale. You got to always be tweaking your artwork and kind of making little changes just to keep it interesting to yourself, but also keep it interesting for your audience.
Thanks. I had a second question.
Okay.
I don't know if I can send you some of my work to get a professional opinion.
You know what? I mean, I don't usually accept that, because if I open myself up to that would probably be a full-time job. But it's one of those things. If you ever catch me at a show, I always let anybody bring up their artwork, and I usually will give them a 5-minute critique if they like that. Sometimes I tell them to come back after the signing, like at the end, so I don't keep anybody waiting, because sometimes a critique takes at least 5 minutes, if not more. But unfortunately, if I was to take samples like that, I think my workload would never allow me to get to it, and I'd probably just frustrate the people who sent it in. So I do apologize. I'm just a realist, I think, when it comes to that stuff. But again, if you ever catch me, I realize you're outside of the country, so it might be a little more difficult. But it's one of those things where and sometimes too, I do occasionally come across in threads on Facebook or different things like that, where people will put up their artwork, and I'll sometimes give a very quick, few sentences to kind of give them some encouragement. But unfortunately, I can't make that a thing that I do. Otherwise, I just would be bombarded. I hope you understand. It would just be too much for me to maneuver.
Thank you, Raul. And if you want to show off your work, definitely post it in the show off channel so we can all see it.
There you go. Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. And then VJ, come on up. You go ahead and you ask your question. You're on mute there. You might want to unmute.
Oh, sorry, my bad.
No worries.
No worries.
My question is, when you were getting into the industry, or maybe even when you got into the industry, when it comes to drawing and anatomy, was that something that you learned from anatomy books, natural talent, or you did a lot of life drawing? Also, the second part to that is, when it comes to anatomy, were you initially better at drawing men versus females? And whichever one you were better at, how did you get better at the other?
Great questions. It was an interesting journey that I went on. My very earliest comic book influence was an artist who's still very much on the top of his game nowadays, which is Arthur Adams, if you're familiar with him. But I adored his artwork and wanted to draw just like him. I copied everything he did. And he had a specific way of handling anatomy that I just found really clicked with me and really kind of broke it down. And to some degree, to this day, there's still a lot of Arthur Adams understructure to a lot of what I guess my evolution has taken me in a different direction, but a lot of his initial influence is still there. But what I ultimately found out that I had to undo was, by learning to draw from somebody who did a really amazing stylization and exaggeration, I kind of had to unlearn it for a bit there, because really what I found I was doing, especially when I look at my early work, is he was doing a form of exaggeration and I thought I was nailing it, but what I was actually doing was exaggerating his exaggerations. So it was a double exaggeration and it was looking a little bit weird. It was looking like too rubbery, a little too, like if he made the wrists a little thin or the waist a little thin, I did it a little more on top of that. And it just kind of was not working. I had to almost go back and kind of fill in the blanks with anatomy. At the time, I actually would kind of, this is again, very early days, pre-internet and Google. So I would actually have to go to like grocery stores and I would buy fashion magazines and I would buy muscle magazines to basically just kind of find, and I built a little like binder where I would have like, oh, here's a bunch of reference of backs, here's a bunch of reference of arms, and I would just kind of try to fill in the blanks there. But ultimately what I found out is you don't really have to learn. It's good to learn how the muscles change shape, mostly the big ones. Like you could get lost in the minutia of all these little tendons and stuff. But what you really need to find out is, what are the big muscle groups? What do they do when they change? Like, what is the shapes? I also found I learned a lot from animation books, because animation is a really great way of breaking down figures into gestures and ciphers and sort of shortcuts. And those shortcuts come into play a lot with comic books, because you don't want to get in the situation where you draw muscles and anatomy where they don't look like they have skin on them. And sometimes animation books help kind of smooth that out so you don't go that route. But initially, I think I learned how to draw female anatomy much earlier. I was almost going to go into animation before I went into comic books, hence the animation books as an influence. And at the time, I was really into Roger Rabbit had come out. So you had like Jessica Rabbit was like a thing, and The Little Mermaid had come out, and I was really inspired by sort of the stylization of that. So I brought a lot of that into comic books. If you look at my original stuff in Gen 13, a lot of people thought it was an anime influence, but it was really a lot of Disney that I was kind of bringing in there, and it's still there to this day. I mean, a lot of my decisions I make are still to sort of tap into that animation influence. But I still naturally, I think, tend to draw women a little bit more. They just kind of like seem a little more natural to me. Sometimes men I have to kind of force it a little bit more. It's a little bit, it's a very different mindset. I mean, when you're drawing a female, it's the approach is just so different. It's very fluid. It's very sort of like almost like dancing or something like that. And then when you're drawing men, it's like kickboxing, or it's almost like chiseled out of like rock or something. You almost have to get this mindset, almost like a Zen kind of thing, to say, okay, this figure just has a completely different energy. And if you sort of like don't sort of embrace each of the energies, it starts to get blasé. You don't want that sort of blasé middle ground where it just doesn't grab anybody. So each has their strength, and you really need to learn those strengths so you can definitely bring the most dynamic result to your artwork. I hope that answers some of your questions.
It did, but your learning of anatomy and whatnot, do you think that knowledge gained before or after you got in to the industry?
Oh no, I was learning as I went. I mean, there's even pictures I think somewhere. I don't know if they're in a magazine or something like that. But when I first got in, I was faking it till I made it. I had comic books spread out on my desk everywhere. I was constantly looking for like the visual language of comics. Like, okay, how did Todd do webs, and how did Jim Lee do rocks? Like, I don't know how to draw a rock. What should I mean, I did, but I didn't know how to draw it in a comic book way. So I was always looking for that language of comic books at the time to sort of say, okay, I'm gonna borrow this way that he draws rocks and this way that he does hair. This other guy, I'm gonna do this. The good thing is my influences were, I had a tight group of influences, but I had at least a few. And that helped because I think in the end, I didn't look like too much like any one artist. I had an Image Comics vibe because I liked all the Image Comics artists, and they kind of had there were threads between all their different styles that kind of were unique, even though they all had very unique personalities and voices that were easy to distinguish. So in the early days, I had, my desk was plastered with reference materials. And as the years have gone on, it's fallen away. At some point, you start to just kind of like, you do it enough, you start to develop your own language. It kind of like rises to the top, and you stop having to refer to those. You start to ingrain it into memory. Nowadays, if I pull up reference, it's mostly because I need a costume reference. So I have a laptop always on my drawing desk. I can pull up a bunch of JPEGs or if I have to draw, for some reason, if I have to draw like a dentist's office or a warehouse or something, it's like, we all think we know what those things look like, but until you actually have to draw it, you're like, I don't know what a dentist chair looks like. Let me pull one up, So sometimes you still need reference that way. But other than that, when it comes to figures, for the most part, I have just a built-in memory now of how to do the anatomy, that sort of thing. But it did come over time, and I was learning on the job. And thankfully, nobody really cared. They just wanted to like me to get the work done. And I think everybody starts out that way. You're not going to start off in this industry and immediately have all of this knowledge and all of this experience, because you're going to be new and you're going to still be filling in the gaps. You're really just good enough to get hired, and then you go from there. In fact, actually, when I did my first comic book, Gen 13, I thought nobody would really pay attention to it. I thought it would actually be a place where I could learn how to draw with not too many eyes on me, and then eventually hopefully rise to something more prominent later on. To my surprise, Gen 13 took off right off the bat. And it's really funny, if you're familiar with that book, if you look at the Gen 13 miniseries, you can look at the first issue and then look at the 5th issue, which were all done in the span of like months of each other. And it looks like, in my opinion, and I've been told this from other people, it looks like two different people drew, because that's how fast I was learning and changing. I even tell people, I've used this analogy many times when I talk about those early days when I was learning comic books. I was working in Jim Lee's studio, and Mark Silvestri was there, and Scott Williams and Will Spertaccio. All these people who were my idols, they were all in the same studio. So I was getting information and learning at such a rapid pace. I often refer to it as the scene from the Matrix when Neo looks at Trinity and goes, "Can you fly a helicopter?" And then she's like, her head just like kind of vibrates, and she goes, "Now I can." Like, that's literally how fast the information was coming. It was like a fire hose in my face. But I learned on the go, and that was kind of like how it happened. And it's probably the fastest I ever made jumps in my life, because there was so much to learn and so much to take in. It was a pretty phenomenal time to sort of like, in a phenomenal place. I feel very fortunate that I was working at this studio with these amazing titans of the industry. It was awesome.
So you would say that when you initially got in, it was more that your style that got you in, as opposed to correct anatomy and whatnot. Would you say that?
For sure, yeah.
So would you say that nowadays it's a little more, because there's so many people applying, so many artists around, that they're a little more stricter, meaning your anatomy has to be on point as well as your style? Or is it the same thing as back when you got in? You're like, this guy's style is good, his anatomy's off, but his style is good, we can hire him.
It's honestly, the answer I think is still pretty much the same. I mean, it's like, if you look at, like, let's say, like, I look at Instagram all the time for art, to see who's coming up, who's happening in art. You discover people all the time. And a lot of times these days, they're not even in comic books. Like, the coolest artists are just making cool art, and maybe they're in animation or who knows what, or maybe they're a YouTube star or something. But what I often find is, to this day, what jumps out at me even now, it very rarely is accuracy. It's what is exciting me. And oftentimes the people that excite me, they're bending the rules constantly when it comes to anatomy. And that's why I always think it's funny, even to this day, when I get sort of lectures online. I mean, I still get it to this day, like, that's not how a woman looks, or that's not how a guy's head looks. I'm kind of thinking, like, I've been hearing that for years. And the truth is people, I think, for the most part, they're not looking for accuracy. I mean, there's amazing artists that do like Alex Ross does reality in such a dynamic way. It works. I mean, because normally if you do things realistic, I often find the results, especially in the world of comic books, it comes off a little flat or a little dull. And maybe because we see these things now in the movies all the time, we're kind of desensitized a little to what reality looks like with superheroes. But I think comic books allows you to get something else, something that bends reality, that gives you something you can't see on the big screen. And I think style and just cool art is always going to sort of like top, I think, an overly restrictive allegiance to reality. I think that's just, again, I mean, I'm sure it can be debated. It'll probably be debated till the end of time. But even too, like oftentimes, like when you look at an artist like oftentimes Norman Rockwell, if you're familiar with his work, he's like this iconic Americana artist who did paintings for the Saturday Evening Post. You see his artwork still even to this day on posters and prints. People often think of him as a realistic artist. In fact, I think he's a big influence on Alex Ross. But if you really look at his stuff, there's exaggeration going on like crazy. He's stretching the necks. He's narrowing the arms. There's always like something like that going on in most of the most interesting artwork. You just have to look for it, kind of.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate you answering all my questions.
Of course.
She-Spawn, go ahead. Ooh. She-Spawn.
Uh-oh.
Audio?
I'm here.
There you go.
I'm okay. I'm 46-year-old, so this is going to take you back to the 80s.
Take me back.
Okay. I want to hear about the concept video game that you were published in. You were published in Nintendo Power for
yes,
winning a concept video game contest.
Correct.
Can you tell us about that video game? And do you still draw the characters from that video game?
That's first of all, great question. It does come up occasionally. In fact, actually, that very issue of Nintendo Power, the one that She-Spawn's referring to, is a if any guys remember the heyday, any guys are old pieces of coal like She-Spawn and me. if you remember the early days of Nintendo in the 80s, shortly after the Nintendo boom, Nintendo started making this magazine that was like, I think, a mail order magazine, because I don't think it was even carried in shops, and it was called Nintendo Power. Ever. Oh yeah, no, it was a fun magazine. I got that was my favorite time of the month when like that thing showed up in my mailbox. So Nintendo Power magazine, it would give you like cheat codes and would kind of give you like previews of games coming out. It was, again, pre-internet. This was how we sort of got our information back then. And there was a contest in there that they had called Invent the Ultimate Video Game. And as I recall, the rules were something like, you can draw it, you can act it out, you can make a song about it. They were kind of basically just saying like anything goes if you're creative. So in other words, you don't have to be a programmer, just pitch your idea. And I thought, well, this is great. At that point, I had my winter break coming up, my winter, Christmas break that all kids got back then. It was like, I was going to have 2 weeks basically to have off from school. And I literally used every day of my break to create this. At the time when you'd get a Nintendo game, I don't know if they still do this, but you'd get these little booklets. I remember with The Legend of Zelda, in fact, was the one I always think of. It was this booklet. Really, it was just loaded with artwork. You'd see each of the characters illustrated in a much more detailed way than they appeared in those 8-bit games. And so I pretty much made my pitch in the form of one of these booklets. So I created like all the characters, created the land, the rules. it was, I would say if you were to compare it, it would probably be something kind of like He-Man and Masters of the Universe esque, like it was like sort of a medieval character. And not to bore you guys with the details, but basically the premise was there was these twins, but they were connected at the arm, so they had to be severed at the arm, and each one of them had a mechanical arm to make up for it, and one kind of went bad and one was good, and it was called Lock Arm. And the idea was, as you progress through the game, it was kind of like Mega Man in the sense that you would get different attachments to put onto your arm, but again, it still had a medieval tech kind of vibe. Like I said, the closest thing I can compare it to is probably the He-Man universe. And I won this contest actually, which was pretty shocking for me at the time. I mean, they flew me to Washington, D.C. for the finals. I remember there was like a room full of us, like 15 of us, different teenagers of different ages. I remember when it was a press event too, where the press could come in and sort of like, again, it was a publicity thing for Nintendo. I mean, at the time I didn't quite realize it, but that was pretty much what it was, to create news and create an event for Nintendo. And I remember there was these two kids that had a video presentation where they'd acted something out. And I remember when the when they opened it up to the press swarmed this booth that had a television set. And I was like, oh man, I'm sunk. I'm standing here like by myself with this little booklet that I drew, and I was going like, oh, this is so bad. I'm gonna probably come in last. And for whatever reason, when it was all said and done, not only did I not come in last, I came in first, which was pretty crazy. And I was 15 years old, by the way. I probably should mention that. I was 15 years old. So I guess wasting that. I remember my parents going like, are you going to go outdoors? Like you're going to just spend your entire winter vacation drawing? But I was dedicated. I mean, it was probably a good precursor to what I do now, because again, when I'm focused on a project, I'll drop everything to do it. I mean, it's just, to me, it's just I got a singular vision. And a lot of times that's what it is. That's what it's about with drawing. You kind of have to be able to put things aside. Like I kind of gave up video games years ago because I felt it was pulling too much time away from my drawing. I felt it was, if I was going to have any free time, I needed to go to family and sort of things that had to do where I was interacting with people, because I was already spending so much time being isolated drawing. So that's the kind of discipline you kind of have to put in. But yeah, there's a magazine out there right now where I think it came out in 1989, where a 15-year-old me is inside of it with my winning entry. And to this day, I think people will even get it CGC'd and I'll sign it. By the way, quick correction. Sometimes people think I did the cover of Nintendo Power for that issue. I did not. It's referring to this contest I won on the inside. I had nothing to do with the cover.
Do you ever draw those characters still, the two twins?
It would be fun to do it. I can't say I have. I mean, I tend to move on quickly to the next thing. I mean, it's funny. When I first got into Wildstorm, there was a thing called the Wildstorm. It was like Wildstorm Art Special or something like that. And Jim Lee at the time said, "Hey, all you guys, if you want to fill in the special, you get like 4 pages to do whatever you want," which is kind of cool. And at the time, I had been creating a completely different comic book series called what was it called? Captain Pyro and the West Coast Avengers, which I don't even ask me where that name came from. But it was like a team of superheroes, very Image-esque, and I did a little 4-page story. You can see it. It's can be found. It's out there. It's the Wildstorm something special. I forget what it's called, but prestige format. And yeah, this story was in there. But what I ultimately found is when it came time after Gen 13 to do my own store or my own comic book, I had just grown out of it. I didn't really want to do that story anymore. In fact, we had already plucked one of the characters to be in Gen 13. The character Freefall was originally a character in this comic book called Captain Pyro and the West Coast Avengers. So I found as time goes on, I just changed my taste. At that point, I wanted to do something more action adventure, something more grounded, because there had been so many superheroes. I felt at that point I didn't want to do another superhero team book. So that's why Danger Girl, I felt I was tapping into something else in my youth, my love of James Bond and Raiders of the Lost Ark and Indiana Jones. And I brought that to to Danger Girl, so I could kind of create something that would go against type, because at the time I just felt another superhero team wasn't necessary. And even now, like I don't draw as much Danger Girl now because my tastes have changed yet again. I think you oftentimes find as an artist, you're always looking for a new stimulation, because you're kind of, that's what keeps your art going, what keeps you engaged and intrigued. So it's hard for me to look back. Although as a novelty, it would be fun to draw the lock-on characters again, just as a goof. It might be fun. I just don't know how many people out there would know what it is or appreciate it. Like yourselves. Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no. I think there might be a very small group that might appreciate it, and it might be fun just as a goof to show them. I mean, I'm not against it, but yeah, I'm oftentimes, maybe it's the marketer in me, I'm oftentimes going for the biggest audience, and I think that might be a very small niche audience that would appreciate it, but maybe not that big.
I think the twins would be great OddKey NFTs.
I'll have to think about that one. They definitely. I still own the IP. I don't think Nintendo owns it, so I think
that would be great.
Yeah.
Well, I'm going to get off the stage now, but I really do want to say one thing before I go. Is
of course
we love you here, and we would really enjoy it if you come back some more.
I appreciate that.
Anytime you get a chance. And you don't even have to do voice chat with us. You can just log in and do text chat. Just say hi. We don't even have to talk comic books. We can just talk about life in general. We're looking
I'll definitely give that some thought.
Friend. We're family.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate the warm welcome, Shizman, and I'll definitely give that some thought. That sounds great.
Go Scorched.
Thank you, Shizman.
All right.
Ric Flair.
Woo! What's up, guys?
Look at that. Nice. Animated everything.
Yeah, man. So look, my question is, I guess when I was younger, I was very fascinated with all comic books and the art. But as I got older, I actually kind of fell more in love as I got older with the business side of things, of just seeing these artists, when they're getting into the business, they're super passionate, they're just trying to make a name for themselves, but then also seeing them learn how to do the business side where hey, owning the rights to your stuff, hey, seeing them move from projects and knowing the right time to when to kind of move on. And then also too, just having the vision, I know you were saying you're older, well, even having the vision to say, hey, here's this new digital collectible stuff coming on. And, hey, probably being more hesitant to even maybe do that because you're older and you're like, oh, I need the physical. Could you speak to some more to the business side of hey, you coming through that industry, did you have somebody to kind of teach you or kind of say, hey, look, man, learn from me, don't make this mistake kind of stuff?
No, really great question. I would say the origins of my attitude towards the business, I give a lot of credit to the OGs, really, in my opinion. I mean, again, for me, the OGs are Todd, Jim Lee, and also I got to put Rob Liefeld in there. These were bigger than life characters, and up until then, I was this quiet artist in high school. I was like, oh, I'll be a quiet artist when I grow up. Maybe I'll work in animation and I'll be quiet and I'll draw and I'll be quiet. And then there was this sort of I never knew as an artist, you kind of this bigger than life presence. And when I would do these, when I first got hired by Jim Lee, and also too, not just, I was already seeing it before then. I remember seeing Todd and Jim and Rob on these videotapes they had at the time where Stan Lee, if anybody saw these are great. If you've ever seen these, Stan Lee would interview the Image guys, and they were these videotapes you could buy at comic book shops, and they were great. They're super entertaining. You can probably find them on YouTube. I think they're on there now, but Stan would sometimes he'd just lean over the desk and talk to Jim Lee for an hour while Jim Lee was drawing. And there's this really great one where Todd and Rob are doing it together, and Stan supposedly falls asleep and they take over, and it's just Todd teasing Rob the whole time. It's so funny, but they're great. But what I kind of realized was these guys are bigger than life. They're kind of really entertaining. And I would read Wizard magazine and see Todd would accept his award in a chicken outfit or just crazy stuff. And I remember when I would go and when I first got in the business and Jim Lee would be at events, he would sometimes jump on the table and say I just drew this sketch. If anybody has a $2 bill, they'll get this sketch. And then everybody's like, oh my God, do I have a $2 bill? Crazy stuff like that to get everybody kind of pumped. And to this day too, even the way I sign my name, it's sort of large, but that's because I always saw Jim Lee signing his name large and just thought that's what you're supposed to do. And now I can't undo it. But yeah, so I kind of think that was always inspiring to me. And then of course, watching these guys grow their business, watching Jim grow, turn into a brand, and then hire guys like myself. Seeing Todd like create a toy company so he could put out his Spawn toys. It just never occurred to me that I couldn't do these things. I was like, well, gosh, this is a totally different way of being an artist. And I never really looked back. As far as like the digital collectibles and this sort of thing, I was on board like right off the bat. Like, I mean, I was that guy who never heard of it at all until, of course, I think a lot of people fell in this category until the big Beeple sale that was at, I think it was Christie's, where it sold for the headline was JPEG sells for like $67 million or something like that. And I think that got a lot of our attention. Like, wait, what? Like, what is that? And I was probably very confused for about 48 hours, but I did this really deep dive that weekend to try to catch up and understand what it was. And I loved the idea of art crashing into the digital currency like crazy. I was not one of these artists who was like super. I mean, yeah, there were, the more I learned about it, I was like, okay, there's some pitfalls here and there, but I was very gung ho and pro it. And in fact, I've actually, none of you guys know this, but I actually worked on multiple projects that never saw the light of day all last year that were going towards the NFT community, but I couldn't really pull it together because the landscape kept changing so fast, and I'd have to adapt and go, oh, this thing I was working on isn't really what's happening. I've got to kind of change and morph to this other thing. And unfortunately, it just kept changing and morphing. I couldn't really keep pace with. I think I'm too much of a perfectionist sometimes with what I want to put out. I wanted to put out something that would be very innovative and exciting. And ultimately, things kind of hit the rocks a little bit more in the last few months, where I was like hesitant to sort of like move forward. But it's something that's always excited me. I always thought they were cool. So when Todd approached me about doing this collectible here, he was doing this whole big pitch to kind of like sell. I was like, Todd, you don't have to sell me on it. I think these are great. I just haven't done it yet, but I've actually wanted to do it, and it was probably one of the easiest sales he had to make, because to me, I think they're super fun. I mean, I think when you're an artist, you're trying to get your art into the hands of people who get excited by it every way possible, whether it's in a comic book, whether it's on a toy or a statue. And to me, it's like, if people want to have these, I'm happy as hell to like create these things. Also, too, I mentioned I have this animation background where I wanted to be an animator. So the idea of having a picture that animates, that's so cool. Like, it's like, I mean, I wish comic books could animate. Oftentimes it's hard to settle on one picture but the digital collectibles have this whole range that you can do. You can create animation. You can create, I feel like we're only scratching the surface of what these things are going to be. So I'm all about it. I think it's great. And again, as an artist and as an entrepreneur, any way I can kind of like get my artwork out there with more eyes and more people excited about collecting it, I'm all about it. So hopefully you get where I'm coming from on that.
Heck yeah, man. I totally agree. And also, too, even for upcoming artists, think how many artists sit out there and starve to death, where now, hey, they're getting a piece of every time their little piece of art sells, hey, they're getting actually some, money for that. So I think even for as a starting artist, I mean, that's a game changer.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, to me, that was one of the biggest parts about it. And I know there's some, it seems like there's some disruption going on now. Hopefully it'll get worked out, where creator royalties are a little bit now being debated whether they'll continue or not. But I feel they have to, because that is where the enthusiasm of somebody like myself is. I mean, we don't want something crazy in the aftermarket, but having a piece of it when something really like is a win for everybody. I think that's because, again, I've seen too many artists over the years where they sell their comic book pages, and now, like years later, they're going for millions. And I do feel bad sometimes for these artists, because sometimes some of these original OG artists that created these pages that are going for so much, they are often living from hand to mouth. Thankfully, I'm not in that particular case, but I think artists are always due some sort of, little kickback for the art they create. And I think it's only fair. So I do love that NFTs have created or the digital collectibles or whatever it is. It's like they've created that pathway. And I think that has been one of the biggest encouraging things that kind of make me go, hey, this is super fun. Plus, it only makes me want to create something even cooler that only can escalate in value. That's what lets me bring my best to the table for you guys. Because if I can create something that's like, oh man, just like with the comic books, it's like, this is only going to go up in value because this is so goddamn cool. Like you want creators feeling that way when they bring something to the table. So I really do hope the creator royalties stays and doesn't go away, because to me, that is a big motivator for a lot of us coming into the space.
Yeah, and on that creator royalties thing, there was definitely a lot of controversy when some major marketplaces switched up. But there's a lot of things you can do to protect the creator royalties, and so they won't be going away anytime soon.
Well, I, as an artist, I definitely like to hear that. And again, Todd and I talk about this kind of stuff all the time because it's, again, that's the exciting thing about this landscape is it is constantly changing, but sometimes it's like it's a sometimes it can be a bumpy road too. I mean, that's part of the excitement, I guess.
Yep, it's a new frontier. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Rick.
Jazole, feel free to come on up and ask your question.
Hello. I had a question, a bit of a technical question for when you have, and I imagine even with your experience, you still run into some creative blocks. So if you have a drawing in your head and it just on the day, it doesn't come out of your pencil, do you have something you do or a technique or whatever you do to free it up and get the drawing done?
I have a few different techniques. The one that comes to mind though is it's funny too. I used to watch this show Mad Men. I don't know how many people in the chat have familiar with Mad Men, the show with John Hamm and stuff of the advertising agency in the 1960s. But there was an episode where one of his proteges was having a tough time putting together a campaign for one of the car, because the whole idea they were an ad campaign creation, creative team. And she was like, oh, I've been going over this Chrysler account so many times. Don was the guy who Don Draper played, but she's talking to Don. She's like, I can't get the idea. I mean, I've been going over it multiple times. I have all the specs here. I have all the pictures of the car. I just can't get the idea. And he said something that was so dead on and so true, which is one of the reasons I love that show, is because it actually did dive a bit into the nuances of being in an advertising agency, which was kind of cool. But he basically said, look at all the material, pour over it, take it all in, and then put it away and go home and do something else. He said, tomorrow morning, you'll have 3 ideas. And in the show, sure enough, she came back and she had more than 3 ideas. But that is so true. You never underestimate the ability of your subconscious to keep going when you're doing something else. I found it happens more often than not. If you want something, but you can't quite figure it out, devour all the influence and the things that kind of spark your creativity, even if it's not getting you where you want to be. Just take it all in, go through a bunch of influence, look through a picture gallery online that kind of is sort of where you want to go, and then put it away and just let yourself do something else. More often than not, you'll wake up and you will have an idea, or sometimes several, because something about the human brain, it'll keep trying to solve that problem. I also find sometimes too, if I'm talking to somebody and we're trying to think of who was that actor or what was the name of that movie or whatever it is, and it doesn't come to mind. Oftentimes 2 hours later, it'll just pop right in there because my brain was doing a search in the back while I was doing something else. And the brain is pretty amazing that way. But also too, there's this really great book that I guess is coming out from the producer, Rick Rubin. He's a famous music producer. He's putting out a book about creativity. And I saw this interview with him, and this book sounds fascinating. Again, I think it comes out in January, but he talks about how so much of creativity is sort of being quiet and just kind of, this sounds super goofy Zen, but I think there's something truth about this. It's just kind of letting the universe kind of in a weird way present the ideas to you. And what I mean by that is if you look at something like Star Wars or something like that, I firmly believe something like Star Wars probably would have come about in another year or two if George Lucas hadn't done it, because there was something about that time period where that was the right time for that to happen. And I think sometimes it's just, are you the creator who's going to allow those influences in and actually act on it? Are you going to be able to be observant enough around you, listen to conversations, take in information about where the technology is or where sort of style is, or just where the audience is at that moment, and then use that to create something that's perfectly timed for that moment. And I think a lot of times there's a lot to be said about, like I said, just sort of sometimes just being quiet and just kind of letting the creativity come to you, because sometimes you just can't force it. Sometimes it feels too forced if you do that. You have to just kind of give it a little bit of time. But again, taking that influence, really digest it, and then walk away. See if that creativity comes to you maybe in a day or two.
Yeah, awesome. Jazzy, thank you for coming up on stage. I appreciate that. Peggy, please come up and ask your question. Trivia legend right here.
Hi, Peggy.
Hey, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay, I'm a bit starstruck at the moment, and I'm very excited to speak to you, J. Scott Campbell.
My pleasure.
And I was actually drawn to your art when I first saw Gwen Stacy statue. And,
nice. Yeah, one of my first ones.
I didn't know it was you that did the statue. So don't stop what you're doing. I love your art. I love how you do the poses. I love the details and everything. So
thank you.
And I am from Malaysia, by the way. So you
managed
to
cool.
reach someone that far away.
I love that.
Okay, so I do have a question.
Of course.
So I know you're working on the fairy tale fantasies right now.
I am.
And would you be able to share what is your next character that you're planning to release?
I'm so excited to do that. I think I'm not supposed to, but I think people are going to be super thrilled when they see the one that's coming up next. In fact, the one that we have coming out after the one we just announced was the Evil Queen. And she's actually been, as far as behind the scenes, she's been done for a while. I was waiting for them to unveil her. They have to pick the right time, the schedule, to sort of like for how it ships and how it works with their bigger company as a whole. So sometimes when something's done, it doesn't come out just because it's done. They have to find the right time for it to be put out. But the next one is already entirely sculpted. In fact, it's in the coloring stage right now where we pick how it's going to look coloring. It's a very fun process. But I can't unfortunately share it just yet because we tend to like to keep that close to the vest. But I can say that not only is that one coming out, but that there are already plans for several past that. So this is a line that's going very strong. I'm very grateful that the audience has embraced this. There's been no stopping moving ahead. If anything, I wish we could just do these faster, but they take the time they take. And if you follow me on social media, you'll see a lot of the drawings that go into getting these things to look the way they do. I'm very meticulous about making sure they look as close to my vision as possible. So there's no shortage of effort put into these things. But the next one, I can't say exactly when it's going to come out, I think, or be announced. I think they're probably going to announce it. My guess is sometime the first quarter of next year would be my guess. There's definitely more to come if you're a big fan of those statues, Peggy.
Good to know. Thank you so much. Please don't stop what
you're
doing.
So welcome. I don't intend to. I'm having too much fun.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming to stage, Peggy. I appreciate that. And going back to a little bit of the digital collectibles, someone was curious about if you have actually collected any digital collectibles yourself. Or are there any projects that interest you?
That's a great question. I think, it's so funny. And this is probably has something to do with like the comic book aspect of me too. I mean, I used to go to the comic book shop all the time, and I don't buy comics as much as I used to, which is funny. It's not that I don't enjoy them. I tend to get them when they're collected in a book or something like that. So I can kind of just like collect it all and look at it when the story's all done. It's probably just my mindset nowadays at being older. That sort of thing. I can delay gratification to some degree. When I was a teenager and early in life, I couldn't wait. I had to have the comic the day it came out, sometimes the hour it came out. And I still love that enthusiasm. I think I've just kind of gotten older and there's other things I have to worry about as an adult sometimes. But, I haven't collected any, but I find it so fascinating and so interesting. It hasn't been for lack of finding the world super cool. I think it's just as an artist, I love to create. So what gets me excited is, oh man, this is such a cool community. I want to create something for this community. So that's where my enthusiasm comes. I think I'm just to these statues that I make and stuff like that. Like I love making statues. I can't say I have a ton of them in my house because it doesn't always work for my surroundings of that. But I love the process of making them. I love seeing what other statue makers have made. So I think it's just a creator's mindset. To me, I love sort of giving an audience something that I think will hit the bullseye with what they love. So to me, it's more about that. But I mean, you never know. I might turn a corner and start collecting a few. I think I've been an outsider looking in on, but like with my face pressed up against the glass. so think of it that way.
Yeah, when you become a creator, sometimes it's hard to go back to not creating and collecting for sure.
Yeah, you get a little spoiled too. Sometimes people, like your colleagues, just give you stuff, and you're like, "Cool."
Yeah.
you get some perks, and it spoils you a little bit, unfortunately.
Yeah, you get the really good stuff from the friends. That's awesome.
sometimes.
So actually, one last question, and if anyone has to come up stage, we don't want to take too much of his time, but so we recently actually had Jason Sean Alexander in the Discord, and he was able to share his screen while he did a live drawing. And he got to go through the drawing process, and everyone in the community got to watch and ask questions. So Tabby was wondering if you would be willing to do a live drawing in the future some point for the cafe.
I'm certainly not against that. I think that sounds very cool. Actually, it's funny too. I mean, I still draw mostly traditionally. I do some after effects with usually. I mean, of course, coloring in our business always is digital. But a lot of us are still doing the line art, still the old-fashioned way, and penciling it and inking it, and then we scan it, and then it kind of goes into the digital. But I am trying to get more and more comfortable with digital drawing so that I could probably do something like that and have it look enough like what people expect it to look like, but on a Cintiq or something like that. So or an iPad. So yeah, I love the idea of that. And again, I'm kind of playing catch up here because again, sometimes I feel, even though I love the innovation of all different kinds of ways that we can get our art out there, I've been a little slow to adopt it. In fact, I'm impressed that Todd does so much of his inking now on an iPad and stuff, because I feel like it's something to be admired, because, sometimes as those artists get older, we get sort of like, oh, they're not going to adapt to the new way of doing things. And I definitely want to be one of those guys who embraces the digital a lot more than I have, because I kind of feel like it could take my art in a whole nother direction too. I kind of like what I see digital artists doing out there. So yeah, I would love to do that. I think I just got to get a little more comfortable with the pens and make sure that I look like I know what I'm doing. Otherwise I might embarrass myself. But yeah,
no, I think the community would love to see a trial run. That'd be awesome.
Trial run, a test. Well, hey, I'd be up for that.
Well, I don't want to take too much of your time. I really appreciate you coming out. If there's no last questions, is there any final thoughts, maybe words you want to talk about, or any alpha on this upcoming Spawn 300 drop?
Sure. Well, we're still putting together we're still polishing it and kind of getting it ready. There's some last minute innovations we're going to add to it that we're really excited about that I can't quite disclose here, but it's a little bit in the realm of that last question. So you guys can guess what that might be. I think I'm really excited about it. From what I've seen, I think you guys are going to love it. It's you've already seen some of the previews, but there's even more to it than that. The stuff I've seen out there, it's not the entire thing. So definitely, you guys have some surprises still coming your way. And as far as tonight, this was a super fun experience. I had fun talking to everybody. Everybody had great questions. Super cool community. Absolutely look forward to coming back again.
Appreciate it, J. Scott. And sorry, one last question. Someone asked what the J means.
Oh, sure. I know, it's funny.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's funny. Oftentimes, no, it's good. Oftentimes, for some reason, people seem to think it means Jason. And I kind of have, it's not, by the way, but I understand why they kind of came to that conclusion. I think there was a very famous Gen 13 cover from years ago where Jason Pearson did a recreation of the Janet Jackson cover. If anybody remembers this from back in the day, where the hands were on her chest. This is a very famous cover, and we did a spoof of that on Gen 13 with Caitlin and the character Grunge putting his hands there, and it was done by Jason Pearson. But he just signed the artwork Jason, and I think to this day people still mistake it for my artwork. So I think they think the J stands for Jason, but no, it actually stands for Jeff. Jeff is my first name, but my parents always called my sister and myself by our middle names. So I don't have a tremendous association with the name Jeff. And but I think I was a fan at the time of Michael J. Fox back when Back to the Future was out. So I was like, oh, I'll be J. Scott Campbell. That's kind of cool. I've
got a good ring to it.
Nerding out. Yeah, it had a bounce to it, I guess, kind of. So that's why I stuck with it, and it seems to have worked out okay. But
well, I
yeah,
think you have a
means
particularly
Jeff.
awesome name. I think you have a really awesome name because my middle name is Scott and my last name is Campbell as well. So.
Oh, no way! That's awesome. That's very cool. Well, you won't forget it then. That's good.
Nope. Thank you, Jay Scott. I appreciate you. And thank you guys for coming out tonight. Hope you guys enjoyed that super special experience, and maybe we'll see you in the future.
Absolutely. No, I look forward to it, and have a great weekend, everybody.